Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Antidote Inside. And today we're sitting back down with Alekos Filini, who you may remember of Who is Satoshi fame. Well, this time Alekos is here to talk about his company, an Antidote-incubated company, Enclavia. Hello, Alekos.
Hello. Thank you for having me again.
Our pleasure. So let's start with what Enclavia is to get right into it. Can you give me the kind of elevator pitch for it?
Yeah. So Enclavia is building an Enclaves as a service platform. So the idea is to make TEs, trusted execution environments, also shortened as Enclaves, as easy as possible to use. We try to take all the complexity away, try to give all the tools to companies so that they can focus on building their product, their use cases, and not on the infrastructure and management aspect of Enclaves.
Okay. So this is confidential computing made easy?
Yeah, pretty much, yes.
Okay, nice. Let's assume no one listening knows what trusted enclaves are. How would you explain them to a layperson?
Yeah, so it's a very technical product. So usually when I have to explain it, I talk about the two kind of main properties of enclaves. One property is the fact that an enclave is sort of an isolated computer where nobody, not even the operator running the computer, can look inside of. So it gives you encryption of data, not only at rest, but also while in use, while the data is being processed, which obviously opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of privacy and security, so keeping information secure and private. And the other interesting property is what we call attestation, which is maybe a bit more complicated to understand, but technically an enclave can prove to you that it's running a certain code. So it can basically tell you this is the instructions I'm running, and anybody can verify this attestation. So when two computers are talking to each other, which could also be a client, so like a smartphone connecting to a server, this smartphone can validate this attestation and can know that it's talking to an honest counterparty and not to a random maybe attacker or a random computer on the web.
Okay. So the thing I think about is, and maybe folks aren't aware of this, but like in the military, where they've got to keep secrets really secret, they keep computers, the term is air gapped, right? So they have a computer that is not connected to the internet, and then you come there with like a USB stick or something, and well, maybe that's not secure either, but anyway, you stick that in the computer, then you can do the computing and do the secure stuff, and then you come away and that thing's never touched the internet, so you know that no one's hacked it, got any secrets out of it. And this kind of transfers that to the cloud, right? Although that kind of security, broadly speaking.
Broadly speaking, yeah. So computer security is always very nuanced when we have to talk about it, but generally speaking, it's a tool. It's not perfect as trade-offs as with any other tools, but it's a tool that gives cloud compute workloads much more privacy, much more security, much more integrity protection, so you can really verify what's going on the other side when you're talking to cloud computers.
Mm-hmm. And this is actually really quite hard to do, right? That's why a lot of people don't use secure enclaves. What makes Enclavia 10x more accessible?
Yeah, there's multiple layers of complexity when using enclaves. An enclave, as I was mentioning before, is sort of a computer, just a box. So it's kind of like you buy an empty, when you build your computer, you put together the components and then there's nothing running on it. So you need to put stuff inside the enclave. So from a user perspective, you can buy enclaves from Amazon, they call it AWS Nitro. Even modern CPUs, AMD and Intel, they have kind of enclaves built in, but it's this empty box. So then for you as a user, there's a lot of very technical, very like specialized code, especially around encryption, that you have to develop because data is not encrypted magically, automatically. So somebody needs to write that code, and it's very sensitive code. If you screw it up, then it doesn't work. So on one end, there's very kind of specific knowledge that the developer needs to have to implement encryption properly. Secondly is building your code, so bundling everything together into the enclave. In order for an enclave to be effective, that needs to be reproducible. So the idea is you want to be able to prove to anybody, look, this is my code. I take this code, I compile it, and this is the enclave that I'm running.
Mm-hmm.
And usually builds are not really reproducible unless you use specific tools, which again, you kind of need to know how to use and how to, well, you need to understand. And thirdly, there's the point of running enclaves, because you cannot just launch an enclave. Usually you have, especially taking the example of Amazon, of AWS, you have a parent instance, which is a regular EC2 instance, and then this instance can launch an enclave, and you have to use the parent instance to proxy data in and out. But you have to do it securely, you have to do it in an encrypted way, in a way that cannot be like man in the middle. So there's lots of things from code to building to deploying that is quite complicated. And what Enclavia is trying to do is we abstract away all of the complexity. It's all open source, so people can audit our code. But from a user perspective, they just have to build a Docker image and push it, and that's it. And we deal with all the other things.
Okay, so very, very much dev tooling, but
yes.
Taking something that is very complex and requires an experienced skill set, and then making it accessible to a much wider set of developers.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. So I want to turn to the problems Enclavia solves. So I think we've got a good technical understanding or a better technical understanding of what you're doing and how you're making it easier for developers. If I am a developer, what might I use this for? What problem does it solve?
So this is going to get us a little bit in the conversation of target customers. I'm currently mostly focusing on the Bitcoin space because I know that very well. So I've been in Bitcoin companies. I've created BDK, which is used by Bitcoin companies. So I kind of understand what Bitcoin companies need. So specifically talking about Bitcoin companies, what you can use enclaves for is if you have private keys, you keep them in there. They're much more safe. You can even generate the key inside of the enclave at like a first boot. So first time you start the enclave, you generate a key, which means you can prove to anybody that you don't know that key. So let's say one example is you run an eCash mint. The operator could always steal user funds. But with an enclave, you can prove, look, this key was generated inside of the enclave, so I don't even have a backup of this key. So only the enclave can manage those funds. And you can audit the code, you can reproduce the build, etc. So you know that this mint is honest and cannot steal user funds.
So unruggable eCash mints.
Unruggable eCash is one example. And generally speaking, when you have private keys, even if you have a backup, let's say like hot wallets, it's always better to put them in these sort of isolated environments.
And that could be particularly useful for, say, Lightning nodes, right, for individuals. Because the challenge with Lightning, as I understand it, is it to be the best possible experience, it needs to be always on.
Yeah.
And translating to an enthusiast, someone who's got into Bitcoin, is like, oh, I want to be on Lightning and I want to be non-custodial, then you end up essentially having to run a server in your home. I mean, it is basically that, right? It might be a tiny little box, it might be a Mac Mini or a Raspberry Pi, but you're running a server at home to be able to benefit from it. With this, you could actually have a lot more faith or trust in having that being run in the cloud, so you benefit from the always-on features, with it being far simpler to engage with.
Yeah, because again, one of the properties of enclaves is that that even the operator cannot look into it. So you can run your Lightning node in Enclavia, and I, as the operator, cannot steal your funds. I cannot take your key and copy it. And there's a precedent for this, which is very interesting, which is Async, the company built in Phoenix. They have a massive routing node that they use to route all the payments. And they're using enclaves on AWS specifically to secure this massive node, to just get, to make sure those keys are not potentially exposed to Amazon employees, attackers, etc.
Yeah, okay, I see. You're thinking a little bit beyond Bitcoin as well, though. So Bitcoin's your kind of entry market. You've got the experience there. You have the address book, and well, actually, before we get into wider markets, let's talk a little bit more about the customers you're talking to today. Are they making specifically use of this feature of securing seeds in the cloud, or how are you solving problems for them?
Yes, there's actually a second use case, which I'm going to mention now, and then it connects to potential customers. The second use case is more purely privacy. So even if you don't manage private keys, you might still have, you as a company offering a Bitcoin service, you might still have sort of toxic data, like data that that's sensitive for privacy reasons about your customers that you would rather not have. And Enclaves, again, are kind of a good solution for this because you can have these, let's say, like XPubs. So you want to monitor your users' balance. You can do that inside of an enclave. So then you can prove to your users that you don't see this data and you cannot be compelled to release this data. So it's almost as if everything was processed in the client, in the mobile app or whatever, but you're actually processing it in cloud, which has massive, scalability, uptime benefits, and complexity. It's much less complicated. So basically, the two kind of customers or two categories of customers that I'm going after are either companies running and managing Lightning nodes with lots of money at stake, or companies co-signing. There's like companies doing, policies where you can you have one key in your app, the other key is in the server validates some spending limits before they co-sign. So all those companies fall under the first use case, so protecting keys. eCache means, etc.
Or something like BitKey, another example. Yeah, okay.
And the second category is, again, maybe like self-custodian wallets or Lightning wallets that don't have any keys, but they want to offer better services for the users, such as, I want to send you a transaction notification when a transaction comes in. In order to do this, I need to monitor your wallet from the server side, which is generally a no-no. Like self-custodian wallets don't want to do that. But with Enclaves, you can then offer better services to your users without compromising their privacy.
Okay, I follow. So you have your core customer base or the businesses you're serving today around those needs. Now I will come back to wider than Bitcoin, because that's kind of your wedge market, right? As you see it, that's where you go to market. But the confidential computing market is actually a lot larger than just the Bitcoin ecosystem. So where else do you see use cases for Enclavia?
Yes, so I think the obvious two other markets are Fintech and healthcare. Fintech, because again, it's sensitive both for privacy and security. You have some sort of secrets that you need to keep, and you have confidential, like bank statement, bank records, so private data that you want to keep safe. And also in the healthcare, again, because there's medical records being moved around, and that also requires kind of the highest security and privacy possible. And later on, which I see as definitely a market, but very, very hard to enter, is more like governments, military. They also need security, privacy, because again, they deal with very sensitive data. But obviously, as a startup, that's very hard to access those markets. So I'm aware that's going to take a few years before I can get there.
And you're not going straight for fintech and healthcare today, right? You are your kind of beachhead market is Bitcoin, but you see this expanding.
Yeah, the idea is to start with Bitcoin. I have the connections. I think the Bitcoin world is more prone to testing things out. It's still more of a I don't want to say it's not a mature ecosystem, but it's still experimenting a lot. While fintechs are more or less standardized by now, they all do a certain thing and that's it. So I think Bitcoin companies are more prone to adopting these sort of projects, and I can get my battle testing, my early testing with these companies. And then once I have some track record, I can then try to move on to larger institutions, larger companies.
To give a concrete example for listeners in the health world, for example, this probably appeals more to any of the British audience who are listening, but one of the things gumming up the NHS is patient data and sharing of patient data between departments of the NHS. So, broadly speaking, your medical records are confidential. If you've had some kind of scan and it's in an embarrassing place or relating to something you don't want to talk about, you're not really comfortable with that just being in an open folder online that someone could pilfer. Enclaves actually really help here, right? Because you can secure that data provably and then allow access in a much more gated manner.
Yeah, my dream would be data in cloud, protected in a way that the user has to give explicit consent for it to be like unlocked. So it would mean all my medical records are backed up somewhere safe. So if I lose my phone, I'm not losing my sensitive medical records. but it's not like anybody or any doctor even can go access them. They have to like ask for permission. So imagine you have an app on your phone that when you go to the doctor's appointment, you give them access for 30 minutes to your records, these sort of things. So I think this is kind of the best of both worlds. On one end, you have the Bitcoin crowd, the cypherpunk crowd. They push a lot for local self-custody, self-made cloud and everything. But there are obviously big challenges, especially for non-technical people. So I think the best of both worlds is everything lives in cloud, but it's encrypted at rest and in use, and the user has to give explicit consent to allow third parties to see this data.
I think they have, I might be wrong here, but I think they have something similar, maybe in a cruder form in Estonia, where you have like a ID card with a chip on it. And when you go into, let's say you'll visit your doctor, you put the card in the machine and that unlocks the data for the doctor to be able to look at things.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I mean, this is ages old that I read about this.
I think they do something similar in Italy, but it's not like, as far as I know, it's not like the record is locked. They just use the card to pull up your data, but it's like
so it's like
unencrypted. It's like an identifier. Yes, yeah. I think so, but yeah.
Okay, fair enough. This is also a market that isn't. Let's say it is at the top end. This is an addressable market that is large, right? And there are incumbents. You mentioned AWS Nitro, you mentioned Intel and AMD, but they're not quite what Enclavia is offering, right? So could you talk about the differentiation between yourself and those enormous clouds, and then the kind of chips? And are there, who are your competitors? Who are your comparable companies?
Yeah, they are definitely not competitors. They're actually my building blocks. So I'm building on top of them. And the parallel I would make is a computer and the operating system. So the computer itself is not a competitor to the operating system. The computer manufacturer could go and build an operating system, so then they go and compete with me. But currently, as things are now, it's different layers. So it's much more, the product they offer is much more low level. So you need, again, this special knowledge. And my product is designed to be more high level, abstracted, etc. There are competitors. I've done some research. My understanding is most of them are heavily kind of pivoting to AI or heavily focusing on AI, which makes sense. Yeah. It's kind of the current bubble in a way. Plus, it's again, Enclaves offer these privacy benefits, and privacy in AI is a big topic, big hot topic. So it makes sense that they go after that. There are maybe like the closest competitor I could find to what I'm building is a company called Evervolt. Although they seem to have pivoted more to PCI, I think called PCI DSS, the credit card security standards. So if you go to their own page, they really advertise their solution as store credit card numbers safely. Mm-hmm. And they also have a side thing, which is Evervolt Enclaves, which is similar to what I'm building. I think mine is better for a bunch of technical reasons, which I'm not going to go into now. I should have a comparison page on my website at some point. But yeah, so there are, I think, similar concepts out there. I think my advantage, especially within the Bitcoin world, is my understanding of the Bitcoin world, my connections in the Bitcoin world. As far as I know, very few companies in the Bitcoin world are currently adopting Enclaves. So I think there's an opportunity there to bring Enclaves.
Is that lack of adoption due to the complexity, in your opinion?
Yeah, from the conversation I've had so far, it seems to be like most companies are aware of them. Most companies have them on the roadmap, but they've kind of put them off because it's not their core product, obviously. Mm-hmm. So Bitcoin companies tend to be small, underfunded, so they just focus their resources on the core product, and this is like a nice to have, an extra security benefit. Mm-hmm. So my thesis is if I make this very easy, then they're going to go and use it because they can still keep focusing on their product, but now their product is more secure.
Okay. So dev tooling a layer above the bare metal. If you're making a dev tooling company, obviously you have to be extremely developer friendly. As you look at the developer tooling landscape, now not all these businesses will actually compete with you. They may not even be related to you, but I'm thinking, places like Vercel, Twilio, Snowflake, these kind of really quite large companies that provide dev infrastructure or dev tooling. How do you see yourself matching them in terms of developer friendliness?
That's a very very interesting question. I think very tough question as well, because it generally involves balancing really well how much of your product is open source, how much you instead kind of keep secret, closed source. I think developer tools need to be, to some extent, open source, because developers want to like poke into them and then patch them and then make changes, etc. But on the other hand, you need to have a product to sell. So I don't have an answer yet, honestly. I'm still like figuring it out, still processing it. I think there's a lot that can be learned looking at those companies. And I think it's also hard for me as a developer to think about, well, as a developer, you always have the tendency to recreate things yourself. So for me, it's like, why would I pay Vercel to host my website when I can spin up a server and configure it and spend
You're
days?
a real developer.
Right. So my kind of instinct used to be, and I think until recently, all these products don't make sense. And then I started the business and I realized you don't have infinite time. So you very well might as well pay somebody to handle something so that you don't have to handle it. So I think even myself, I went through this process very recently of shifting my mindset from, oh, I'm a developer, I can do anything, to actually it doesn't make sense to do anything, just focus on my product.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, so I think you're underplaying the ease with which you've made engaging with secure enclaves. Like, you have made it materially easier. I've seen your product demo. Do you view your moat as being, and you may still be developing this thinking, but the product, the developer experience, the customer base, or is it something else entirely?
I think it's also too early to say. I see a few potential, maybe it's a combination of a few factors that kind of would create a moat. Pure software nowadays with AI tends to be less of a moat.
Agreed.
But my argument is this is security critical cryptographic software. I'm going to get obviously like audits done on the code, certifications and everything. So sure, you can go and rebuild it. But if you're running, millions, billions of dollars, would you really go and build it, or would you rather pay $500 per month for a service that does it for you? So software is a moat. I think in this case is one of those cases where software isn't much of a moat, but in this case it still is, in my opinion, just because it's certified and everything.
Mm. And cryptography is cryptography. Like, as much as you can vibe code anything, you do need cryptographic security to be open.
Yeah,
I agree with you there. I mean, without putting words in your mouth, I feel it may be the developer experience. And I think what you're starting to touch on is, and in your previous comment as well, is you're coming out of incubation now, and you're about to enter the build phase, over the next 3 months. Focus kind of naturally shifts away from the building stage to the positioning, marketing, and traction stage. Now, you do have some early customers. You're likely to need to focus on how you explain and demonstrate how easy you've made this to devs. And there are examples out there of websites where you can basically run a simulation of the whole thing on the site. Maybe that's something you consider. But what I'm leading towards is, as you now come out of incubation, the curriculum is kind of drawing to a close. What does a brilliant summer, next 3 months, look like for you ahead of September?
So brilliant summer is making progress on the product itself. Currently it's private beta, so it's working, but only to a few kind of close set of early adopters, early customers. I want to get it over the summer. I want to get it at least to a public beta, if not to production grade, maybe for a subset of the product, maybe not all of it, but a good subset of the product that can get a few customers live by September. And the other side is selling. So I'm starting now to speak about this with a few people from my circle. Obviously, in preparation of demo day, I want to have as many customers as possible, or as many prospects as possible. So I think a big part of it is going to be having more and more conversations, selling more, so that I can prove traction, which I think can be proven, but it needs to be proven. It needs to be the hard work needs to be done.
And what would you say is the work stream you're working on right now that you're most actively trying to de-risk?
really good question. I think so. Tying back to my previous moat question, there's a few other things that I think are moats. Even, for example, my reputation having created BDK and my experience having created BDK in dev tooling, as you were saying. So I think I know what it takes to build a good development tool. But at the same time, probably the thing that I see the biggest risk right now at this stage of the product, where it's still very early, there's many features I have in mind for the future, but right now those features are not there. The biggest risk is somebody not really kind of understanding the value and be like, oh, I can just recreate it. So I've had a few conversations, or I can think of a couple of conversations where the company was interested in Enclaves, but they were saying, oh, I'm just going to rebuild it. Maybe, this tends to be with larger companies, so they have more resources and they can take on such a big task. But yeah, I think that the biggest risk is kind of being blind to this, to the risk of people copying it, people not really copying it, but recreating it. So
attempting to build versus die, basically.
Yeah. So I think eventually, as more and more features are added, then it's going to be stronger and stronger. But right now, this is probably the biggest risk while the product is in a very early stage. So maybe what I'm trying to say is trying to identify the smallest set of features that are sellable, that I can go and sell right now, that people are not just going to be, oh, I'm going to rebuild it myself. Especially in the Bitcoin community, people tend to be very paranoid, so they really want to go and rebuild. So maybe that's the kind of the biggest risk I see, which I guess kind of a moat risk. So figuring out your moat, I think I'm going to have a moat with my full roadmap, when my full roadmap is developed, but I need to get there and I need to find it as soon as possible.
Okay. So I hear the challenge as being positioning and articulation of like why it's nonsensical for a company to spend resources going out and building this themselves. It's essentially like a big side quest, and it's be like, I see similar approaches to like if you need to do KYC, no one these days decides, oh, I'll go build my KYC stack. But about 10 years ago, people did think that, and it was a fool's errand. One trend I'm alive to is as more and more agents crawl the web and hoover up everything, you can see the demand, or you can feel the demand for secrecy and privacy, or the ability to retain information away from the machines is growing. So 10 years from now, do you think encrypted in use is just how computing works by default?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be, I think that's the direction we're going. Even hardware manufacturers are building more and more encryption, kind of transparent encryption in the hardware. The thing that Enclaves allows you to do is you can prove to other people that the hardware is encrypted. So most of the time, even regular computers, they encrypt memory. I mean, more like servers. They tend to encrypt memory, but you don't know if it's actually being encrypted, and the attestation is what proves to you that it is being encrypted. But yeah, I think definitely we're going there. And from my perspective as a company, I also have a very kind of ambitious roadmap. At some point, obviously that takes tons and tons of resources. I would try to go as close as possible as fully attested, traced even execution. So I would like to get to a point where I can process your data and I can give you proof that I've processed your data legitimately, that you can validate in milliseconds, maybe to prove hours of computation. So this can kind of already be done with zero knowledge. It's very, very expensive. It's not done in hardware. So I have ideas that they're kind of in the back of my mind. Obviously, they're not my focus right now, but I think there's a path to fully like attested, not just encrypted, but even fully attested chips where you know exactly what's going on.
I can see, the aerospace and defense curious part of me is like, oh, okay. So you can have like these autonomous drones where you can actually verify what's kind of gone on.
All the decisions that were made and fully traced.
Excellent. So positioning and articulation of your moat and really getting that kind of, I guess, customer-facing messaging is the mission over the summer. Let's check in again as we approach demo day, and we'll see where you've got to.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Alekos. If this resonated with anyone or you're inspired, you can reach out to him and learn more about Enclavia. And if you would like to be an entrepreneur, you can apply to Antidote at antidotebtc.com. Thanks for tuning in.